Hey, so good afternoon, everybody. So thank you for coming along. My name is Paul Andrew, and we're going to be talking about network connectivity options for connecting to Office 365 and to the Microsoft networks and Microsoft data centers where we host Office 365 workloads. We're going to be talking quite a bit about ExpressRoute, but I'll also talk a little bit about just where our data centers are and how they're connected together and that network that we have connecting between them. And I'll also talk about some of the options you have and some of the planning that you want to do before you connect your users into Office 365 and what you want to think about there. We'll talk specifically about ExpressRoute for Office 365. It was announced back in March, and we're planning to have that be available in the third quarter of the calendar year. So we'll talk about what that means. And then I have a little bit of time available to talk about implementing ExpressRoute and the steps that you have to go through to actually get on board. Fortunately, ExpressRoute is available for Azure customers today. It is Azure ExpressRoute after all. It's been available since last May for connectivity to Microsoft networks for use of Azure public and private services. So there is quite a lot of information available today that we can talk about how you actually implement that networking technology. All right, does that sound good? Looks like we got a good room, so looking forward to the session. Please feel free to ask questions as we go through, and I'll take them as I can. All right, so first we're going to talk about the data centers that we host Office 365 and our other commercial cloud services in. And I want to talk just a little bit about the investment that Microsoft has made in those data centers. We've invested a lot of money in a lot of different locations where we have data centers, and we have, in addition to that, we have a network which connects all of those data centers together. So that network actually has internet connectivity in 23 countries, which is over 50 locations in those 23 countries that we have internet connectivity. And we use that network in order to provide better connections for our customers to our cloud services. Those data centers and that network are used by all Microsoft services, both the commercial ones and the consumer ones, of course. And we've strived to make sure that when you connect to a Microsoft service, you're connecting as quickly as possible onto our network so that we can control the experience and make sure that you don't have congestion that you might experience if you're connecting just directly over the public internet. So it is actually one of the three largest networks in the world. If you think of the largest telcos that you know of, a lot of those telcos are regional. Microsoft does have a global network. There's a couple of other very large internet companies that also have these global networks like Microsoft has. It's difficult to say which one is number one or number two or number three. Nobody really discloses exactly how much data egresses from these networks, but third-party firms have evaluated that certainly Microsoft is one of the top three. The next size networks are nowhere near. It is a pretty staggering amount of capacity there. I think I saw some additional stats on one of the earlier, if you've been to any of the Azure sessions today, they had some equally amazing stats about Microsoft networking. So we also have peering with network operators that implement the internet and implement internet service providers and other network operators. We have peering with over 1,500 ISPs. Peering means we have either a routing agreement that we have provided information to them about routes to Microsoft IP addresses, which is how you find our servers, or we have a physical peering relationship, which is where we have actually physically cables interconnected with another network operator. So that happens at each of our peering locations that we participate in. So here's a look at where Office 365 related data centers are around the world. And there's some that we've had for several years, and there's a few here that we've actually just launched in the last few months. And so I'll walk through how these work. Now, Office 365 is being a SaaS service. You sign up as a customer. You don't choose where resources are located to support your users. You put in your address, and then we will choose the data center or the region where your services should be located based on what that address is that you choose. So you typically, unlike some of our Azure services where you might purchase resources in a variety of different geographies, you don't do that with Office 365. You sign up for the service, and we work out how to locate the data best for your users. So we actually have separate regions for users in different locations. If you're a customer in North America, and so this happens if you put in your address as Canada, the United States, or Mexico, your tenant will be located in one of these data centers, possibly more, because we do replicate data for tenants to multiple data centers. So that's for North America. For Europe, we have these 4 countries where we have data centers. We've got Amsterdam in the Netherlands, Dublin in Ireland, Austria, and Finland. We actually just expanded this region to add Austria and Finland quite recently. And so we now have 4 countries in Europe where data, at least for Exchange Online, is replicated. For Asia Pacific region, we have data centers in Singapore and Hong Kong. For Brazil specifically, we have a data center in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and this is the only region where we have the primary in one location for all tenants. Typically, the primary server for each workload is non-deterministic, but it is in a specific one of those 4 or 2 data centers in the region. Because Brazil's peer is in Texas, we do keep the primary for all customers in Brazil, so the failover or the replicas are up there in Texas. We have a US government region, Des Moines and Boydton, and we have a China region. This is actually run by a partner of Microsoft's called 21 Vianet. They run this service for us. They run Office 365 for users in China. And then we have a Japan region. We have multiple data centers in Japan, which we launched in December of last year. And we have an Australia region, so we have data centers in Australia, in New South Wales, and in Victoria. And we launched that just in March, so 2 months ago now. And we're currently working on our India region, where we'll have data centers in India, and this will, of course, be for customers who sign up in India. All right, so I've got a summary here of how that looks if you want to take this away and look at it later. So it just shows the name of the region, the locations for those data centers, and we do actually have more details about the locations of these data centers on the Office 365 Trust Center. One of the key differentiators Microsoft has is that we are very transparent about where we host your data and what data we host in those different locations. So you can take a look on the Office 365 Trust Center. It has details about what services are hosted in what locations. And we do make we do have online service terms which we publish where we will commit for specifically United States customers and customers who are in Europe that we will keep your data at rest, and we actually specify what data that is, largely emails and SharePoint documents, but we will keep your data at rest inside of the United States or Europe for those 2 regions. We are planning to make those same terms available for our recently launched Japan and Australia regions. The update to those terms is taking a little bit of time, so that hasn't gone through yet. But that's something that not a lot of cloud service providers are able to do, and it's something that we find very valuable. So check that out on the Office 365 Trust Center. All right. So recently launched data centers. I talked about Japan, Australia, and the work that we're starting on India. And then sometimes we add data centers, we'll actually just expand an existing region. And this is what we did recently with Austria and Finland. They expand the Europe region that we already have. So they provide additional resiliency, additional capacity for customers in Europe. And it means that if there is a failover that's required, and this is for Exchange Online capacity, then we have the option of 4 different countries that we can keep those replicas in. Does everyone like marbles? Ever played marbles? And you like flick the marble into the circle and try and push someone else's out? Yeah. All right, so let's move on. So I have another set of servers that I want to talk to you about, and this has been called the Microsoft Edge. We may have to come up with a more networking name for this, given recent announcements. But we have an edge network of servers, which was originally created for our Bing search service. And these edge networks are much lower security servers that are set up in network co-location facilities or server co-location facilities. And there are many, many more than what I've shown up there. I'll get to that in a minute. But these servers are essentially public data, public information. They're not high security locations, and they enable us to cache data for customers. Caching in such a way that we couldn't just do it in a content delivery network where you might use Akamai or one of these other companies and just host data in every city in the world. We certainly do that as well for Office 365. But what we use these edge locations for is we can run front-end custom code that doesn't relate to any customer data. And we have started to deploy the Office 365 portal in these edge locations. The Office team does have a higher security requirement than the Bing search index caches, and we are going through and re-looking at the security of each of these sites. We have some requirements around locks, video monitoring, and attendance at those sites, which aren't necessarily required if you just have a public search engine data there. So we do have some additional security requirements. We will be terminating SSL connections at these locations, and we're working through adding these locations to our capability to expand to Office 365. Currently, it's just for the Office 365 portal, and so code required for that will be running there, but we expect to expand this in the future as well. All right, so we've talked so far about where data centers are that we use for Office 365. I shared a bit about the network that Microsoft has that connects all those data centers together and connects them to the internet. And I told you one of the key things was to have connectivity into that network in order to provide great performance for your users of Office 365. And so until we have ExpressRoute for Office 365, the only option for connecting to Office 365 is to connect over the internet, and connecting at one of those 50-plus peering connections in 23 countries as is listed there. And so those peering locations are essentially they're co-location facilities with lots of routing equipment in them, and kind of how they work is you may have heard of network routing protocols like BGP, and there's LAN-based ones like OSPF and RIP. And what these do is they have a table of various network classes or IP address ranges, and they'll have a destination where you should route traffic to. And we share this information on network peering. And the way that it is shared on the internet is we use this ASN number, which references the network. It's essentially the number that is owned by the network. And Microsoft has a network number of 8075. That's the number for our network, our worldwide network. And the routing information that is shared basically asks people if they have traffic for one of the Microsoft IP addresses, can they please route it back to the 8075 network. So there's a public database, it's called peeringdb.com, where you can go and take a look at all of this if you're really interested in what's going on the internet. Or maybe if you're doing a little bit of research into the internet service provider and the network operators who are between your connection or some of your users and the Microsoft network. So you can essentially get in to start trying to trace and debug where is your network connectivity and is it optimal based on where you're located and how far the data actually has to travel. So we have this public peering database, and Microsoft actually has a page here at microsoft.com/peering where we encourage network operators to contact us and talk about peering and how to share routing information. So this is intended for network operators, not for end customers or end user office locations. If you go to the site, you'll notice some of the requirements are very network operator centric. They start with we need a 10 gigabit connection to be able to talk about the physical connection. All right, so if you actually do go onto this site, and I did this a little bit back, and if you go and look at the Microsoft network, you can actually go and see where all the locations are that Microsoft's network has connectivity. So there's a list up here. This is a list that I generated by going to this public site. So it's actually possible it's a little bit out of date. There are a couple of other potential issues with this list. Some of these sites may be on-net peering and some may be off-net peering. Off-net's kind of an interesting term where you have a physical network connection, but actually it's not connected to the rest of the network. So there's a few things that might impact the accuracy of this, and if you are debugging a network issue or you're looking to figure out what's going on, you're best to do some more direct investigation. But it's very interesting to take a look at the site and just look at some of the locations and the sizes of connection pipes that are on there. All right, so we've spent a bit of time looking at the Microsoft network, and I talked a little bit about how you connect to that. Essentially, your option today is connecting over the public internet, and so we think about how to optimize that connection and also how to plan that connectivity. And so we recommend that you do capacity planning before connecting to Office 365. I always like to think about the servers in the data center room that I used to have when I was working in a small company, and we used to have this we used to have this room that you'd go in, and there'd be the halide gas that would kill you if there was a fire in there, and that's where you put all your racks and servers. Well, the thing about that room is it's in the next room, or it's in the next building, and you can have as many Ethernet cables as you want, or as much fiber as you want to go and buy and terminate and connect up to connect. You're not paying a network operator typically for any of that connectivity, and so you don't typically plan how much bandwidth you need to connect into your data center room. And so when you're connecting to Office 365, we really are connecting over the internet, but we're making that same connection to effectively what were your file servers and what was your mail server. And so you've got to think about how much bandwidth is required. We have published quite a bit of documentation that can help you to do that planning. We have Excel-based tools that you can use to calculate based on the number of users you have in each of your locations and what kind of access they make to SharePoint and OneDrive for Business and to Skype for Business. And so you can get some helpful guidance out of that for bandwidth calculations. And this is all published on a site that we have, which is at aka.ms/tune. So there's lots of great information there. We do recommend, if you have more than 25 users in a particular site, that you also do a little bit more. You do a little bit of monitoring of how much bandwidth users actually take up. Maybe you might want to run a pilot and then run some measurements on the routers, or look at what kind of data is running past the firewall that's related to Office 365, and use that a little bit to extrapolate out how much you're going to get. And the reason for that is, the amount of traffic that you use over that network connection is going to depend on how much usage your users make of the various Office 365 services. So you might have very significant email usage and people who send a lot of things around on attachments, or you might have a group of users who are very adept at adding attachments into OneDrive for Business or SharePoint Online project site and then sending links to their users. Now that's going to make a big difference in terms of the amount of traffic that is communicated to Exchange Online, and probably a big difference in the amount of traffic that's communicated back to OneDrive for Business as well. Those things won't necessarily balance out, but they're always different for different companies. There's a very wide range of types of traffic. So for larger implementations with large numbers of users at a particular site, do spend some time. It's going to take several weeks typically to go through and figure out how much bandwidth is going to be needed and make a best guess estimate, and then account for headroom that you want to have on that traffic. So this is required generally whether you connect to Office 365 over the public internet or over a private connection such as ExpressRoute, you need to know what kind of capacity you're going to put on this network link. It doesn't change whether the amount of bandwidth you need doesn't change whether you're on the internet or whether you go to a private connection. So with that, let's move on. We'll talk a little bit about ExpressRoute now. So ExpressRoute is something that we just recently announced for Office 365, and so I have a timeline here. We announced it back in March, and it's expected to be generally available in the third quarter of the calendar year. Our launch partners are AT&T, British Telecom, and Equinix. AT&T and British Telecom are network service providers, so they provide networking directly to office buildings that you have users in. Equinix is an exchange provider, and fewer people have heard of Equinix because of this. Equinix is typically one of those internet backbone companies, and Equinix, being an exchange provider, offers network connections for when you connect up in 2 routers. And so you're responsible for whatever you do with the cables that you plug into those 2 routers. Typically, you'd have a networking cable that goes to your office in some way, but that's essentially what the service provides if you're using one of these exchange providers. So we're going to continue to expand the number of network partners who have availability for Office 365 over ExpressRoute. These will be the first 3 that we have at launch. You can expect a lot more of the network partners who are part of Azure ExpressRoute, because there's more than 20 of those now, to come online and be working on the updated spec that they are required to adhere to for ExpressRoute for Office 365 in the coming months after our launch. So we have the network service providers here and the exchange providers. This shows the cities where each of these companies has availability. And the cities where they have availability is really talking about the city where they have a connection into the Microsoft network. So if you think about that global network that Microsoft has, these are the places where these telcos have a cable that connects into a router which Microsoft owns. And so for AT&T, they have Dallas, Silicon Valley, and Washington, D.C. That'll be their launch locations. That doesn't mean necessarily that your users have to be in Dallas, Silicon Valley, or Washington, D.C. in order to be able to use their service. Likewise, British Telecom, Amsterdam, London, Silicon Valley, and Washington, D.C. That's where they connect into Microsoft. So these guys both provide managed WAN solutions, and their managed WAN solutions can connect to your offices wherever they may be. What they do is they'll provide the WAN, you tell them where your offices are, and they'll set up the connectivity across that WAN, and then that connectivity will also include Office 365, and their connection to Microsoft is in one of these cities. Equinix is a bit of a different equation. They have presences in carrier-neutral facilities all over the world, and in these cities is where they connect into the Microsoft network. They don't provide the networking connection outside of that building, so you would contract with another network operator in order to have that connection outside of that. But it doesn't necessarily limit you to having network connectivity in any of their cities, because you could subscribe to networking connection from where you connect to Equinix in, say, Amsterdam to wherever your users happen to be. All right, so let's move up a little bit and talk a bit more about what is ExpressRoute for Office 365. So simplistically, it is an alternative to a public internet connection for connecting into Office 365. Specifically, it connects into Microsoft's network, not directly into our data centers. We have those connection points in carrier-neutral facilities where we connect to other network operators. But effectively, it gives you direct connectivity into the data centers where Office 365 servers are hosted. It's a premium network connection to Microsoft data centers, so it is abstracting you from some of the things that you see on the internet. Specifically, you get private networking connections where you are connecting over networks owned by network operators that you are contracting with directly, not with any of the internet backbone network operators that you don't contract with directly. You're also getting a network connection that that doesn't have other people sharing the bandwidth that you're paying for. So you get predictable performance with that. And Microsoft provides an SLA over our component of it. If you look at this green line that says ExpressRoute from that router in the middle of the diagram, this is the piece that is Microsoft-owned equipment, and we'll provide the SLA on that part of the network. Of course, you'd want to talk to the network operator that you're working with about what is their availability, and they have some great stories about that as well. But Microsoft provides specifically an SLA on those two physical connections that we have over the green line. This is a little bit gratuitous. It's a diagram showing what a carrier-neutral facility might look like. This is probably unnecessary at this point to talk about, but if you can't imagine a large room full of racks which essentially just have switches and routers and networking cables in, this is what these facilities look like. You don't often come across them, but they tend to be in fairly common locations. There's one in Seattle, where I'm from, in the western downtown, and to me it just looks like a hotel, but somewhere up there in that building, I don't know whether it's in the basement or in the penthouse or somewhere in the middle, there's a floor which has network cables that come into it. I know I'm actually originally from New Zealand, and we have a Sky Tower in Auckland, which is just a really tall building, right, that you go and you can jump off the top with ropes on you. It's a lot of fun. But anyway, it's one of the networking hubs in Auckland. For some reason, that halfway up the building, there's one of these carrier-neutral facilities, and they've got all this cabling that goes up there. I don't know why they didn't put it in a lower building or something, but these things are all over the world, and essentially the network service providers and the exchange providers that we work with for Azure ExpressRoute all have connectivity in these locations. Sometimes it's called a meet me location or a co-location facility because there's lots of people who have equipment located in the same place. But they commonly all look the same, lots of networking equipment and lots of cables. All right, so let's drill in and talk a little bit about the benefits that you get for Office 365 if you look at using Azure ExpressRoute. And the first one is that you really do have a single connection for connecting both to Azure services and Office 365 services. And this can be as simple, if you're using a managed VPN, this can be as simple as just calling up your existing WAN provider and saying, hey, I want to add another site to my WAN and I want it to be Office 365. This could be as simple as it gets, which gives you the capability of, considering Office 365 as another site on your network. And logically it is just another site on your network. Physically it might be in a much more distant location, but it gives you the opportunity to optimize your networking connectivity and treat the connection to Office 365 as a more trusted connection than maybe your public internet connection. All right, so a little bit more about private networking. So private networking allows you to avoid the internet. What it's really doing is it's avoiding commingling of your data with other customers' internet data or internet traffic. So it gives you some privacy. It's important to note that these co-location facilities really are the same co-location facilities where the internet backbone connects through. So there isn't a completely separate network that you're able to make use of. But it does give you another level of privacy, both from I'm not sharing my bandwidth point of view, and I'm also not sharing the data that I have with other people who are connecting over the network. If you're looking for additional security on your network, then we want to recommend other ways of doing that. Although privacy can improve your level of security and trust with the network, there are other technologies that we'd want you to add and think about if you're specifically looking for security at your network layer. This does not replace firewalls that you might have. It doesn't replace proxy servers if you're doing traffic inspection or any of that kind of thing. So when we say we have predictable performance because you're going to get the bandwidth that you're paying for. There's no paying for your DSL connection to the the local consumer ISP, and then they connect that with all the other users in your street, and then they have one DSL connection that they connect back to their exchange. You really do get this bandwidth that you're paying for. And we talked about capacity planning and all of the usual things that you have to do to make sure that you have the right network DNS configuration, and those things still have to be set up with ExpressRoute. It's a way of swapping out your internet connection for a dedicated private network connection. Everything above that layer still has to be managed one way or another. One great way of getting out of some of that management detail is to use one of the network service providers, because they will largely take care of a lot of that for you. They do provide a managed service such that you don't have to do more of those higher level network operations. And the last thing is we provide an SLA on the availability. So we do guarantee that availability of 99.9%. One of the reasons we're able to do that is because we have multiple circuits in each connection. So each connection over Azure ExpressRoute has 2 circuits. We actually split the bandwidth across those 2 circuits. And so if there is an outage or literally a physical outage on one of those circuits, you still will have connectivity and you still will have burst availability for the same bandwidth, because we provide burst bandwidth availability of 2 times the bandwidth that you subscribe to over Azure ExpressRoute. So multiple circuits gives you higher availability, but they are both active both of the time. It is also possible to use internet connection as a backup. The way you want to think about that, and I have this on the next slide as well here, the way you want to think about internet as a backup is Azure ExpressRoute is going to advertise routes to Office 365 and Azure front-end servers. And that's the only traffic that's going to be able to travel over that network connection. We actually ACL those front-end servers, so we have firewall on the end of that. You can't send other traffic down that link. But we will send that out as a higher priority route. But if you still have your internet connection up and for some reason you can't connect to the ExpressRoute connection, your routers will still be able to route traffic for Office 365 over your internet link. So if you imagine you've got this private link and your internet link, if for some reason you can't access that, routers have this concept of priority of routes, and you'll still have the route out to the internet to do that. Question here?
Yeah, can I block that to not ever go with the internet and take the hit of the non-knowledge?
So the question, and this is not an uncommon question, is can I specifically stop my Office 365 connectivity from going over the internet? And yes, of course, you can very easily. I know of a customer who does this, particularly because they don't want their Office 365 traffic to go over their VPN. It's not quite the same scenario, actually, but you control your firewall so you can block that. Another similar question while you're asking that is, can I stop people who are not in my offices from connecting to my Office 365 tenant? There's not a specific security mechanism in ExpressRoute for doing this, but if you do configure ADFS as your sign-in technology, you can actually set up ADFS so that it can't be connected to from the internet. I know this is a bad way of setting up ADFS, so that only users inside your buildings will be able to connect to that. And so therefore, other users outside of your buildings won't be able to sign into Office 365. So these are not specifically network security mechanisms, but those are some examples of things that you can do. There's another question over here.
You mentioned that ExpressRoute supports most workloads out of Office 365. Which ones does it not support?
Yes, I'll actually share details about that and why coming up just in a minute. So yes, the question was about which workloads do we support and which don't we support. So while I'm talking about high availability here, there's one other option that you have with Azure ExpressRoute, which isn't common for these direct connectivity network connections, and that is we allow you to have multiple ExpressRoute connections into Microsoft, and you can have those on a single Azure subscription. So you can actually have connectivity from multiple geographic locations, or potentially from the same location on multiple network operators into Microsoft's network. I know certainly Microsoft data centers typically have multiple network connections from different carriers, with the assumption that if there's an outage on one carrier that affects the whole carrier, we have other carriers that we're using as well, and we can load balance traffic across that. So that is possible to do with ExpressRoute as well. So some great high availability options that you have there. All right, so I talked a little bit about this already. We have these two connection models. We have the exchange provider model and we have the network service provider model. And the network service provider model is, I assume, going to be likely used by smaller companies. And when I say smaller companies, I mean companies who don't necessarily have in-house networking, full-time employees who work on their networking. You can imagine that there's a certain size of company where you might have that, but smaller ones may not. And so they'll want to use these managed WANs that are provided by telcos. In a larger company, not only are you likely to have full-time employees working on networking, but you probably also already have network connections all over the world that you're subscribing to, and you probably have connectivity and maybe even equipment in some of these carrier-neutral facilities. So these are different types of solutions for different types of purposes, but they're both available to anyone who wants to sign up with an Azure subscription. They do have different price points that Azure subscribers pay for them, and they have different amounts of bandwidth as well. Connecting over an exchange provider, you can get connections up to 10 gigabits per second. And with the network service provider, those are available on the low end. They are more flexible because they go right down to 10 megabits per second. The exchange provider ones do not. And then the network service provider ones go up to 1 gigabit per second. Some details about availability and particularly about the workloads that we support. So there's some qualification criteria for Azure ExpressRoute, which is detailed on MSDN, which is just some prerequisites that you have to set up and make sure that you have on your network. And I'll actually talk about those in a little more detail in the next section. And let's see, you do have to have an Azure subscription because Azure ExpressRoute is an Azure service. It is not included with your Office 365 subscription. It's a premium service that you will be using from Azure for that, in addition to Office 365. And typically, you would want to already have a managed WAN of some kind for adding Office 365 into. Otherwise, you're basically starting with that managed WAN that you set up with a telco. That's really the only reason to call that out. Yep. Right, so I actually will talk about this in quite some detail, but simply to answer your question, we have geographic location for Azure ExpressRoute, and so you need to connect to Azure ExpressRoute in the same geography as where your Office 365 service is located. But there's some great new exceptions to that, and so I'll talk about that coming up. The other gentleman's question that I said I had on the next slide, which is here, is about what workloads do we support. So you can see the workloads that we do directly support or will support when it's made available over ExpressRoute. So Exchange Online Protection, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, Office 365 Video, Delve, Skype for Business Online, Office Online, Azure AD and Azure AD Sync, and Power BI and Project Online. You may have also heard there have been some announcements by the Skype for Business team about some improvements that they're going to be making in the future, which is coming after our launch timeframe towards the beginning of the next 2016. They'll be rolling out adding QoS and other services that benefit Skype for Business customers over ExpressRoute. Now, some of the workloads that we don't support over Azure ExpressRoute. The first is Yammer. Yammer is actually an acquisition that Microsoft made, and so it's not located in the same data centers as other Microsoft services, and so it's not going to be supported on ExpressRoute. It is actually moving to Microsoft data centers in the very near future, and we'll have to look at what that means for ExpressRoute. and keep working on that. Office 365 Pro Plus client downloads. These are actually hosted in a global CDN outside of Microsoft data centers, and so they are not going to be downloaded over ExpressRoute. For companies that are going to be using ExpressRoute, you're probably of the size that you want to deploy your Office 2013 client centrally, and so you're less likely to be using the direct download of Office 365 Pro Plus from the portal that is available. So it's unlikely that this is going to impact you. On-premises identity provider sign-in. The reason this is here is because you can't connect to your ADFS service over ExpressRoute. You can't do that because you're either connecting to your ADFS service from within your network, in which case you're connecting directly to the machine, or from outside of your network, in which case you're on the public internet and you're connecting to your ADFS endpoint in your location. So neither of those has any cause to go over ExpressRoute because Microsoft data centers are not involved. And then we have DNS and CDN connectivity. Domain name service is a public service. It's not directly available from Microsoft data centers, and so it makes no sense to connect that over ExpressRoute. CDNs are the same thing. We use CDN providers for hosting public content, which is used by the Outlook web app, used by OneDrive for Business home pages and those sorts of things. And so those are not stored in Microsoft data centers. Also, the Office 365 service in China, which is hosted by a partner of Microsoft called 21 ViaNet, is not available over ExpressRoute. All right. Question, what if ADFS is located in Azure? It's an interesting question. If ADFS is located in Azure, in a VM that you host in Azure, and your users are on premises connecting to it, then it would go over an ExpressRoute connection. Quite simply because if you have Azure services, the front ends for those Azure services are going to be advertised over the ExpressRoute network, just the same as the Office 365 front end services. If you are a user outside of your office and connecting to an ADFS service that's hosted in Azure VMs, then no, it would not connect over ExpressRoute, unless you first did a VPN, and it would kind of be an odd sort of thing. But does that make sense? Okay. All right. So now I want to talk about implementation of ExpressRoute. And I want to do this in a couple of different ways. First, I want to talk about some of the expected scenarios where we see Office 365 customers making use of Azure ExpressRoute. And then I want to just talk very plainly about the steps that you have to go through to actually implement ExpressRoute. So first, let's talk about the scenarios. The first scenario I have is if you happen to be an existing Azure ExpressRoute customer. Do we have any existing Azure ExpressRoute customers? 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this is for you guys. And this is not only for you 3 guys, but it is also possible if you want to get a head start on setting up Azure ExpressRoute for Office 365. A great way to do that is to go and get a little bit of Azure resource and set up an Azure ExpressRoute with your telco today that you're going to be adding Office 365 to. It doesn't have to cost very much for some of those low bandwidth connectivity, and there certainly is a learning curve to learn about this new networking technology, so that would be a recommended way of getting a head start on starting to use ExpressRoute when it comes out. So the good news is you really don't have to do anything to add Office 365 services once these telcos are onboarded to the updated spec and once they've updated their configuration. So you're going to need to coordinate with your network provider to make sure that you know when they're doing that and if they have any different requirements that you might need to adhere to. But from Microsoft's point of view, we have data centers where both Azure and Office 365 are in. We are going to be modifying our firewalls and our routers and our route advertising so that Office 365 front ends can be accessed over this same link. But there's no other change from Microsoft's point of view to that. You may have to increase the bandwidth that you subscribe to for ExpressRoute if you're adding Office 365 traffic. And you might want to look at that capacity planning, but that's the only thing really that should impact you when we turn this on. All right, so for the next type of customer, scenario that I wanted to talk about. And this scenario is where you have one of these managed WANs and you have multiple sites already, and you happen to get this from one of the Azure ExpressRoute network service provider partners. And so what this means is you can very easily ask them to add in Office 365 into the managed WAN and effectively think about it as just another site on your WAN. So this should be a really easy transition working with these network service provider companies. If you already have one of the ones that is on our partner list or on the Azure ExpressRoute partner list, which is adding Office 365 in the future, ask them about when they're going to be ready and maybe start to think about when you might make that switch over. This can be pretty significant because if I go back to the arrows are moving just slightly there. If we go back to the previous picture, if you have multiple sites, sometimes you might have multiple sites in the same city or in nearby cities, and you just have your internet connection from one of those sites. So in this case, it's from the site that says Customer Data Center. This means that your Office 365 traffic all has to go from customer site 1, for example, across your WAN to your data center, and then across your internet connection. And so if you think about this, this is a much more optimal route where your Office 365 traffic, assuming that is a significant amount of traffic, just goes from customer site 1 across your WAN to Office 365, and you can remove that bottleneck and that connectivity from your third site here, your data center site. Question here? Yes. Yes. So there is a third type of peer that will show up for Office 365. Office 365 front-end IPs are all public IPs, but they're different. They're in a different peering group to both the Azure public and the Azure private ones. There is actually a little more discussion of that and some nice diagrams in an earlier talk this week, the Azure networking talk that Ganesh Srinivasan gave, which goes into that in some more detail. So it's been already, but it was recorded. There's a question here?
So if you have ExpressRoute set up, your home users using their home internet connection, would they still be using the ExpressRoute, or would it just be over the internet?
So if you have home users, presumably they have an office that they go to as well. The ExpressRoute is a physical connection that goes into the office. And so some people might set up to have their home users connect over the internet on a VPN to their local office, and then their Office 365 connectivity is from their home across their ISP and their VPN to their local company office, your office, and then over your ExpressRoute connection off to the Microsoft network. I've heard of it being done, but you're very unlikely to want to have an ExpressRoute connection to an individual's home. The minimum size is that 10 megabit per second connection. It's not suited to a single user home. So yes, the question is if you have signed up for Azure ExpressRoute for Office 365, do you get Azure as well? So yes, you are signing up. The service you're signing up for is Azure ExpressRoute. Today, that service only provides connectivity to Azure services, public peering and private peering. Once we have launched Office 365, that service will provide connectivity to Office 365 and Azure services. And there's no change that you need to make with Microsoft or to that subscription. There's no additional fee that you have with Microsoft in order to allow connectivity to both of those services. So I do use the term MPLS quite a lot. You can use alternate VPN technology so long as it is from a network service provider partner who is working with Azure ExpressRoute. And there are a variety of other VPN technologies. If you're using your own VPN, then you are not going to be an Azure ExpressRoute network service provider partner. And so you would want to look at the exchange provider model and get connectivity with one of those exchange providers into your system. So yes, if in your data center you have a connection into a carrier-neutral facility where, for example, one of those cities where Equinix is, then what you're talking about is basically just a cross-connect, where Equinix will provide Ethernet network connections or some kind of network connection in 2 routers, and you will have to connect those into some equipment that you've put there or that you've managed on your own, most likely. Yep. So, in fact, if you're already in one of those locations, this should be a very easy interconnect. All right, so we're actually talking about this scenario here. Thank you for bringing that up. Here's a diagram of your network. So this is assuming that you are a customer and that you do have your own global network connection. You're not going to be suitable for using a network service provider partner. You're going to be working with one of the exchange provider partners, and Equinix is the launch partner for doing that with. And so the orange part of the connection here would be your networking, whatever that may be, and then there's a router in the middle which is going to be in that carrier-neutral facility, and that's where you're going to get, actually there's going to be 2 routers. There will always be 2 routers, otherwise we can't support our SLA. Our SLA is contingent on there being 2 physical ports and 2 physical routers. That gives us some certainty that there's separate power connections, and we're immune from a hardware failure on one of those routers, at least for the short term. So you have that connection, and then the green part represents the Microsoft network connecting into that carrier-neutral facility. All right, so those are 3 relatively straightforward scenarios that we talked about. The first being you're already on ExpressRoute, the second being you already work with a network service provider, and the third being you have your own networking and you're looking to get connectivity in a carrier-neutral facility. So I want to talk a bit more about customers with offices in multiple locations. And first I'll let this diagram go through. So this is assuming that you have users in the United States and in Italy. I didn't deliberately place that in Italy, but it's in Western Europe. And so you have network connectivity between these 2 locations, and you have connectivity to your Office 365 tenant, which is in Europe. So your tenant will host data in Ireland, in Amsterdam, in Finland, and in Austria for that. And so if you have this connectivity, there is a restriction in Azure ExpressRoute that you can only connect to Microsoft front-end servers in the same geographical region as where your connection is. And so this effectively means, for this diagram here, what we're saying is we're not going to backhaul your data over the Atlantic. Does that make sense? If you are a large customer and you're using a lot of networking capacity, we're saying we need you to connect into our network in Europe in order to do that. Now, the Azure team actually just announced, in fact, I think it was yesterday, they announced that they're having a premium SKU for Azure ExpressRoute where they're going to remove that restriction. So if you want to connect into the Microsoft network just anywhere in any geography, then you'll be able to use this premium SKU that they have. It has a higher price, and that's to cover the extra bandwidth. They do have some additional features as well where they allow for more routes to be broadcast between the 2 networks and some other things. So it's a great option if you want to make use of Microsoft's network to backhaul your data to Office 365 across the world. If you don't use the premium SKU, you need to be able to connect in the geographic region where the Microsoft the tenant for Office 365 is. Before I move on here, there's another question that I often get is, can I route just my SharePoint Online traffic across ExpressRoute, or more particularly, can I route just my Skype for Business traffic across ExpressRoute? And we currently aren't able to support that, but we have work in progress to enable something like that. You might think about doing that if you are unconcerned about any delays in mail propagation, and so you just run that over the internet, but you want to have some predictable performance that you're paying extra for your Skype for Business traffic to keep those phone calls and screen sharing connections going. So we're working on that, but not sure that we'll be able to support that out of Office 365 for our GA date. So here are the geopole regions, and there are 7 of them, and there's a couple of coming soons related to that. And these are the regions in which you need to connect to Azure ExpressRoute in this region if your Office 365 region is there. So, for example, for Europe, you need to connect to Azure ExpressRoute. If you are an Office 365 customer in Europe, you need to connect in the geopole region in Europe. And that means ExpressRoute locations in Amsterdam and London, with Dublin being on the radar for those guys. All right, and you can avoid that restriction of the backhaul traffic fee if you pay that premium SKU cost, and then we will be able to connect anywhere you like. All right. Go ahead.
So, working with our Microsoft team, we were told that, because we have multiple internet egress points across the world, and we would hit Microsoft CAD server in that region and then route your network back to our data center, which is Office 365 data center, which is Chicago.
Right.
So how is that any different than with an ExpressRoute to route your network from these locations?
So that's a good question, and that is true. Our Exchange Online topology has client access front-end servers, which are the same as the Exchange on-premises servers. And if you connect to one of our client access front-end servers anywhere in the world, and in fact, we'll direct your traffic to a cafe server anywhere, the closest to where your internet connection is, then there's no cost to you for the connectivity from that cafe server across Microsoft's network to our mailbox servers. And so that is absolutely true. And that would also be true for ExpressRoute if Exchange was the only workload that you were using in Office 365. OneDrive for Business and Skype for Business have different network topologies, and they don't have that same worldwide cafe server network today. And so that's why you have to be a little bit careful about, you just have to be a little bit careful about what you sign up for, because the Azure ExpressRoute service will not route to a far distant connection unless you have that premium SKU. The premium SKU may be exactly what you want, or you may have other options depending on your specific scenario, which you'd have to talk to people about a bit more, I think. All right. So I want to spend a bit of time now just talking about specifically what are the steps to go through and connect Azure ExpressRoute and how you can use it for Office 365. And so these steps are also on the MSDN website. And there's a lot of detail there because, of course, you can set this up for Azure service connections today. And so you need to have an Azure subscription, of course. As Office 365 customers, you may not have one of those yet, so you need to sign up for that. And all of the configuration for Azure ExpressRoute is done through PowerShell. And so you're going to need to have the latest version of Azure PowerShell to be able to work with that. And then all of the operations that you do in order to configure ExpressRoute, they're done through that PowerShell connection in order to work with the subscription that you have. So then, of course, you have to have a network service provider or an exchange provider who is one of the Azure ExpressRoute partners. And depending on when you want to sign up, and if you want to use Office 365, they need to be one of our launch partners or one that has moved to the version of the ExpressRoute spec that includes Office 365. And then there's a couple of specific network requirements around the IP addresses that you have to have. Essentially, you have to have IP addresses available for the routing operation themselves. The routers will consume a subnet in order to do that routing. And you need to have your own autonomous system number. This is this ASN number. Microsoft's is 8075. You need to have one of these to make the connection also. All right, and then drilling into this in a little more detail, I've got some of the PowerShell commands that you're going to be working with. You're going to be subscribing to Azure ExpressRoute and then coming and running this PowerShell command, new Azure dedicated circuit, and this will let you set up the Azure ExpressRoute circuit. After you've done that, you need to configure that with your network service provider and set that up with them or your exchange provider. But you're essentially setting up the Microsoft part of that with that command. And the second one, which links your ExpressRoute network to the network operator network that you've set up. So here's a nice block diagram, which we also have on the MSDN documentation. You're signing up for an Azure subscription, picking your network service provider, linking the services together, and then the network service provider will enable the connection for you. And then you link the services together, and then you're complete there. And it's very similar for the exchange provider model, where you are going to be creating a new Azure dedicated circuit. In the exchange provider model, you are actually doing the BGP routing yourself. The network service provider is not taking care of that. So you've got a couple of extra steps in there to actually configure the network routing and to forward that on to wherever you want. Otherwise, they are very similar. All right, and then I wanted to talk about what having ExpressRoute means for your internal LAN routing. Now, if you think about it, in the simplistic case where you have one office and you have one LAN, and then your ExpressRoute is a connection over a WAN, and then you separately have a public internet connection. In the simple case, you're moving from a very simple LAN plus internet to LAN plus internet plus a WAN to Microsoft's network. And so this may be the first time that you need to look into routing, some serious routing configuration. Your edge router is going to receive those routes to the Microsoft front-end server IP addresses over Border Gateway Protocol, BGP. And you're likely to be rebroadcasting this using a LAN-based routing protocol. You might or you might not. You might just be using that on your edge router, which is in your perimeter network. Or potentially you are doing that routing at a proxy server where all your internet connectivity, regardless of whether it's Office 365 or the general internet, is going to a proxy server. And you may have separate routes hit as static routes in that proxy server. So the proxy server is managing it. Some people want to keep their Office 365 traffic monitored by their proxy server. We would typically recommend bypassing proxy servers for Office 365 traffic. Reason being is that Office 365 traffic is always encrypted, so it's not easily monitorable, and proxy servers will impact the performance of connecting to Office 365 in a couple of different ways. So we typically recommend bypassing those for your Office 365 traffic. And I did talk about this idea of if you want to block connectivity to your Office 365 traffic from the internet and make it only available from inside of your LAN using ADFS and a non-exposed front end for that. All right, so last thing that I wanted to share is if you are not using proxy servers and not using internal routing and default routes, some people will use pack files for routing and we'll consider a pack file. A pack file, of course, is what Internet Explorer and other browsers load to determine what proxy server they should connect to on the LAN. And so your pack file can contain JavaScript and can do some basic logic across the connection, the IP address where it's connecting to determine whether it should connect to a proxy server, an internet connection, or potentially a separate router that is your connection to ExpressRoute. So it's possible to do that matching in these pack files, and therefore the logic for determining whether routing happens actually happens on the user's PC and is not in a router or a proxy server. So I've heard of people wanting to do each of these different configurations in their LAN. There is a lot more to it than what I've shared here about these today. I just wanted to talk about these to give you an idea about what people are doing and what you're likely to be looking at if you do adopt ExpressRoute and think about this different way of connecting with a premium network connection. All right, so at this point, thank you for staying until 6:05 p.m. at night. I appreciate there are lots of evening activities on tonight. So next steps, if you want to learn more about ExpressRoute, we have an overview of ExpressRoute for Office 365 at aka.ms/ExpressRoute Office 365. There's a link on this slide also to all of the available ExpressRoute locations that we have available today. And then also to the qualification criteria, walking you through the prerequisite steps. And if you want to start onboarding with Azure ExpressRoute today, right now, there's a link there, aka.ms/ERT, where you can do that as well. All right, so thank you very much. These slides will be available on the Yammer network immediately, so if you didn't get all those photos, you're welcome to come and grab that. You've been a great audience today, lots of great questions. Please fill out an eval for me, and this is the last session of the day, so I get to stay around as long as you like to answer questions.